The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. Today we'll be doing the third and final part of a trilogy. This story came from the first of the Afterlife Interrupted books. It involves Cheryl Lynn, who we now say is training for the Afterlife Olympics. If you go back two podcasts, you can hear me spend an entire podcast just on telling her story, which I'll summarize here. Yesterday, the last podcast, the previous podcast, we dealt with compassionate response to her story after hearing it. On that podcast, I had three people, all of whom were born with different kinds of physical disabilities, talking about compassion, how it moves in them, and a lot of their stories. I really enjoyed doing that one and would recommend it to you if you haven't seen it already. This one, though, is the third part, and this one we call spiritual practice that derives from or arises out of hearing this story. So I've been thinking and praying about that, and here's what I have to offer. Sherilyn was not a religious person, so she didn't use religious categories and religious language to live her life and to deal with the blow that was struck when at 24 years old, she was in an automobile accident that resulted in her paralysis. She lost the use of her legs and could never walk again. She also lost her boyfriend in the bargain. At 24, then, she had to reorganize her life around her disability. There was naturally a lot of physical therapy and different other kinds of medical interventions. She said, I worked hard at all of the physical therapy that was given me to do. She was frustrated, and that got expressed sometimes in annoyance. She found that some of the physical therapists were just too chirpy. Some of them, she was frustrated that they didn't seem to have much humanity about them and were very by the book, and working with them just felt like they were interested in their book and their charts. But then she told us near the end of the first time we spoke with her about Estelle. Once she understood that she was with us because she was very near being able to move from an afterlife level that was suitable for people who had been through a trauma. And by the way, she died of a trauma 12 years after her original trauma. She was being put into the back of a dial-a-ride van, seated in her wheelchair. When the wheelchair lift malfunctioned or something happened, she was dropped on her head and killed at the age of 36. When she got into the afterlife that she might not have even really believed existed, she was frustrated to find there was still more life, and she was fed up with life. She didn't really even want to have an afterlife. So she had to be worked with by people that were patient with her and help her to see that she was no longer limited by the paralysis that had affected her physical body prior to her death. But she also needed to kind of grow back some capacities and enthusiasm for life and so on. She had done that sufficiently to work with us, and she went on her way with the help of Estelle. When we got all the way to the part of the process near its conclusion, where the prayer partner said, well, now, who is it that you'd like to have come for you? It needs to be someone who's already died and someone who you would trust to help you move along. Well, she sort of summarized that in her own words and said, if you're telling me that it needs to be somebody that helped me, that can help me move, it would be Estelle. Well, tell us who's Estelle. Estelle was a physical therapist. Unlike all the other ones, she was an artist and something of a dancer even. She said Estelle would come in and she used the word swan as a verb. She would swan into the room and she'd have us close our eyes and imagine our bodies moving in all of the ways that she instructed us to move them. She said, time with Estelle went by quickly. It always felt like art. If there's anybody that is qualified to help me move, it would be Estelle. The prayer partner reminded her, well, remember, she needs to have died. And Cheryl Lynn was a little testy and said, yeah, I got that part. And then Cheryl Lynn went on to say, one day Estelle came in to do our physical therapy and said, before we even start our session, I need to relay some news to you. I've been to my own doctor and gotten a dire medical diagnosis. I have a cancer that's incurable. She said, I promise you, I will keep coming as long as I can to be with you, and I will keep you up to date on is the current state of my health. Now let's get to work. Well, Cheryl Lynn said they all watched her do what she was trying to get them to do. That is to work with what you have and maximize that. Okay. Eventually, she told us that there came a point we watched her get more and more ill with each passing week. Eventually, she reached a point where she couldn't come in any longer, and not long after that, we learned that she had died. But she said Estelle did for us or showed us how to do with ourselves what she was doing with herself. That is to do the best you can with what you have and see if you can push the limits. If anybody is qualified to help me move along and to be Estelle. Well, Estelle didn't speak to us. When she came, she moved into my imagination, and Cheryl Lynn said, you always did make an entrance. Well, we didn't need any more. This was really those two women, and they moved along and went about their way. We were finished. We'd done our job. We always go back to people if we're going to try to tell their story in a public forum, in a book, or now on a podcast, and ask their permission. When we do that, we almost always get a little bit of an update on what's been going on. It's just the natural way that people talk to one another. It's been a while since we last were together. What's it been like since then? Well, Sherilyn explained to us that she was like 24 going on 10. She died at 30, what did I say, 36. But she said, all I really want to do is move because I couldn't move myself for so long. All I'm doing is doing cartwheels on the lawn like a 10-year-old. And she said, nobody is pressuring me to stop that nonsense or get on to other things. She said, everyone here is just so good and nobody is judging anybody else. Nobody's trying to boss anybody else. I'm just doing what I enjoy doing, and I'm sure I won't do it for all eternity, but for right now, that's all I want to do is move. So that's the gist of where that story leaves off. Now, my little mission today is to share with you a spiritual practice that I practice in my own life. Many of my spiritual practices derive from my experience of having been a follower of Jesus, a Christian, a Catholic, a priest, a Dominican, all these things. So I'm just going to speak from the heart about hope. Because when I prayed about it, thought about it, it seemed to me that in addition to the loss of the use of her legs and the ability to walk, there came a point at which if she didn't lose hope utterly, she lost almost all of it. Now, I haven't been paralyzed at the age of 24, and she was already a very athletic woman. She told us that she taught water aerobics while she was in college. She was in college at the time of her death. And that whatever she would have done with her life would have always involved a lot of outdoors activity and athletic activity. She mentioned the Olympics, and she particularly admired the really muscular women, and she was thinking more of the Winter Olympics and the skiers and the effort that it would involve of getting up early before everyone else and being so dedicated to your craft as to trying to learn how to do it. She really liked the skiers who flew off a ramp. You must have seen that on the Olympics, where they just sail through the air, and the goal is to try to uh, go the farthest distance in the air until you touch down, and then they measure, where your skis touch down, and you win the gold if you went the furthest. Anyway, she said, I did try to do some of those wheelchair athletics. I tried the wheelchair basketball thing. She said it just didn't take. She also thought, well, now I'm going to be doing a whole lot more sitting than I ever would have thought. Maybe I'll become a real reader and student. She was a college student, so it wasn't as though she'd never had read a book, but it wasn't something that she did for pleasure. She thought, well, maybe I'll become that. I'll get really interested in literature and reading. She tried that for a time and said it just didn't take. So there were a couple of things that she did attempt, and as she said, they just didn't take. She never did tell us that there was something that really did take in her language. She didn't seem to find a next purpose, anything that got her excited with a sense of a calling or career. It was mostly just physical therapy and trying to get through one day at a time until she died. Well, it seemed to me that she lost hope because on the initially there was no more reason to hope that she'd regain the use of her legs and be able to walk again. And that turned out to be true. So you can understand where a person might lose hope because they have hoped against hope and it didn't turn out. And so it turned out a situation that might have been hopeful at the beginning was hopeless at the end. That happens. Uh, Having that be about one's own mobility and the use of one's legs, that's huge. But I'm guessing that if you're listening to or watching this podcast, there's been something in your life where you had hoped and maybe hoped against hope that something you wanted very much would happen, and then in the end it didn't. So how does one deal with that? Uh, that's one thing that I'd like to talk about in this episode. Now, remember that Cheryl Lynn wasn't a religious person, and there's times when I don't feel like I am. But on the other hand, yes, I practice my faith and I lead worship and so on. It's just that Jesus was, you might think of him as a religious character, but in his time and place as a first century Jew, he would go to a synagogue and he would speak, and then very often he would be run out of town because he was saying things that people didn't want to hear. Even at the end, it was partly the religious leaders of his time and place who, working with the Roman officials, got rid of him, had him killed. So there's a way in which I think that I'm religious, and then sometimes I'm a good fit in my religious setting, and other times the fit isn't exactly great, but you do what you can to make the best fit. Um, but I'm thinking about hope. There's a line that I love very much when I say Mass. If you're familiar with the Catholic Mass, you would know it right away. And if you're not, I'll explain it to you. About three-quarters of the way through a weekend Mass, any Mass, but on the weekend Mass, it's usually about an hour long. And about three-quarters of the way through, we pray the Lord's Prayer together. And, Catholics will get to the part where deliver us from evil. And then we pause. Uh, if there are any Protestants in the room, they probably keep going and say, "For thine is the kingdom and the power." Well, the Catholics have stopped. And the priest, that be me, says this line. I'm doing it from memory. There's different versions of it, but here's the one that comes rolls off my tongue. Deliver us, Lord, from every evil. Grant us peace in our day. In your mercy, keep us free from sin and protect us from all anxiety as we wait in joyful hope for the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Then we raise our hands and say, "For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours now and forever." Well, for whatever reason, of all the prayers that I pray, many of which are liturgical prayers that are in books. That little line has stayed with me over the course of my adult life. I've been a priest 41 years now, and heard that prayer said by priests since my childhood. As we wait in joyful hope. Well, I named this podcast The Joyful Friar after St. Dominic, the founder of the order that I've been a member of now for 46 years. It's, I just think it's an essential part of a life well lived is to be hopeful. And if you have to be sort of dispassionately hopeful, if that's the best you can manage, okay. But if I can manage to be joyfully hopeful, that's even better. If you recall, Cheryl Lynn didn't have a sense of there being an afterlife anyway. And so once she learned that her legs were probably never going to function again and she would never be out of that wheelchair, she had no hope in her future mobility. Her her therapist Estelle managed to reach into her and at least give her a little bit of a spark. She said, there were times when I could see that I was improved, but never to the point of being able to walk again. So there might have been a spark of hope in there, but it certainly wasn't Cheryl Lynn's strong suit at all. And she had no notion that there would be an afterlife in which she would be completely mobile and able to do cartwheels on the line. That matters to me because I really am absolutely rock solid sure that I will survive my death, and so will you, and so will everybody else, regardless of whether they believe in an afterlife or they don't. I think it's just physics. It's the metaphysics of who and what we are. And I don't think that needs to be thought of in religious terms necessarily. There are lots and lots of people who just don't move through their life with uh, this practice in these categories, but I do. When when there's something that I want very much, and then it appears that it's not going to happen, and sometimes that's because other people don't want it to happen, and then you have an opponent. When I've been through things in my life at almost 70 years old where the thing that I had hoped for uh, failed to come true. That makes me sad. But I learned early in life that no one's responsible for my happiness but me. If I can't be happy, can I at least be at peace? Can I find a kind of a neutral? Do I have to be unhappy because something didn't go as I wanted it to? Do I have to be angry at somebody else that might have um, orchestrated things so that my wish didn't come true? Um, can I be accepting of things that didn't go my way, even very important ones? That doesn't happen overnight, but I don't want to get in my own way and make things harder than they have to be. When I recognize that something I hoped for is not going to happen, it's out of reach, it really is impossible, and I need to turn the page, I turn the page. I turn the page. One of the ways that I do that is I try to count my blessings. As much as I would have liked that thing to come to pass the way that I envisioned it or dreamt it, that that did not turn out that way. What do I do? Well, one thing that I do is simply accept that truth as a truth and say, well, the truth is that's not going to happen. Am I going to let my happiness now depend on that? And am I consequently going to be unhappy? Well, if I did that, I'd have to turn this podcast into the joyless friar. I would have to really betray my vocation because I believe my vocation is the same one that every follower of Jesus has to go out to all the world and tell the good news. In order to tell the good news, you first have to embody the good news. You have to be good news. Well, in the news, there are always a lot of different topics. And the one that used to take up so much space in the headlines that I had so much pinned my hopes on that didn't turn out my way, I might just need to relegate that to a lesser importance. That used to be the thing that I really counted on, and now it's gone. I might need to grieve that a little bit and then turn it over. Just say to God, I really want to be your servant. I want to be useful, and I'm not going to be very useful if I keep thinking about that. So help me not think about that. One of the ways to change the way you're thinking, for me anyway, I'm talking from my own experience, is to count my blessings. All right, I didn't get that blessing that I wanted. What are the blessings that are right here, right now? And then I can say, well, for example, in this setting, my legs work. I don't have to rely on a wheelchair or a dial-a-ride. I don't have to go to physical therapy. I wake up largely without pain. At almost 70, I deal with doctors very little. Um, I'm grateful for the health that I do enjoy. I'm grateful for the work that I get to do. I'm grateful for you. Um, I can sit in the morning and just do a kind of a listing, a litany of gratitude of things that I'm grateful for. And I believe that lifts my spirits and it gets me ready for the day. That's what I do. And I don't think that's being sappy or anything else. I just think it's real. It's true. There are things that I can be grateful for. And I've had bad times in my life, but even then, I had reasons for gratitude. So anyway, that's the way I'm approaching that. Hang on just a second.
Hello,
I'm on a pass.
this was probably my last.
Hey, Chantel, that was Father Tommy was at my door. All right, three, two, one. I think in my own life, I'm determined that whether a day is a good day or a bad day in the news, or in my own estimation about did I accomplish what I set out to do? Uh, was I surrounded by happy people and gratitude? And, did I have a good round of golf? Did I preach a good homily? Did whatever I did, was I happy with it? There are days when you're just not, when things go badly. And when they go badly, I make sure that I sit still and do a counting of blessings. It's not difficult to do. You could do that. You just do it. That's all. You just say, oops, my thoughts are all heavy and frustrating and sad. I think I need to take a moment. I find sometimes too, when things feel like they're going badly, it's easy to think that you're all alone and nobody loves you. Has that been true for you? It's not true. I have to sit still and I go into prayer and I pray and I have a whole bunch of saint and angel friends. And it's not like they flutter all over the room and I feel like I'm in some ecstatic religious experience. I just sit down and pray and I open myself to the Holy Spirit and I say, help me to be grateful for what is going well today. And it doesn't take but a few minutes to do that. And then I get up and I go back to work. Um, so that's one spiritual practice, I think, is just to not let your own thoughts run away with you in a direction that's hopeless. I might at some point, maybe the next day, need to look for a new goal. once in a while, I've been working hard on some kind of project that didn't pan out. Well, then I need to turn the page. Sometimes that involves giving a blessing to someone who I'm now angry at because um, they thwarted my plan. Well, all right. Jesus had lots of plans thwarted, and I just go to him and say, I know you know what this feels like. Would you help me move through this as quickly as I can with this at the least amount of emotional energy spent on it? Because I want to be available to other people. And when you're a public person like I am, um, people have a right to you because you've kind of given them that, and and they shouldn't have to wonder whether you're having a good day or a bad day when they approach you. I just try to say, help me be available to the next person and the next thing that I do in your service, and help me not let that other thing that happened yesterday or the day before or this disappointment uh, ruin today. It doesn't need to. I want to focus back on hope again. I wonder if Cheryl Lynn had known that she was going to have an afterlife and that she was going to be completely able-bodied in it, would that have helped her during those 12 years that she was struggling with the physical therapy that wasn't accomplishing what she wanted it to? Could she have waited in joyful hope for the day that she'd be that girl on the lawn doing somersaults and cartwheels? There are times when I indulge that. It's another thing you can do, and it doesn't cost a thing. You can sit still and go into prayer and imagine what you hope will happen after you die. When I lead people in a process like that on retreats that I do, very often um, one of the things that runs all through the room is that people have some hope of a reunion with a loved one. Are there people who you have loved who have died? Can you imagine being back with them? And maybe being back with them in a state that's better than you ever knew them before. For example, if you only knew your grandparents as older people who got older and older and more infirm until they died. Can you imagine being back with them beyond where that even enters in? Can you imagine being in the company of people you love where we're all whole, healthy, happy, free, and unencumbered? Sometimes I encourage people who have difficult loves. Many of you pay attention to this podcast because the topic of uh, traumatic death has touched your heart. Some of you have lost a child to suicide or lost a loved one into a hole of drug abuse that ended badly, different things like that. Can you imagine, and I don't mean just make believe, but can you allow the Holy Spirit to help you um, use your imagination to hope for that day when you get to see the whole, healed, healthy version of a person who wasn't able to display that the last time you saw them? Do you have any broken relationships that were just irreconcilable and you had to turn the page on them? I have a two or three. Fortunately, my life hasn't had a lot of that kind of disruption. I've moved away from a lot of people I love because of the fact that I'm in an I'm assignable, I have this vow of obedience where I go where I'm sent. But there's been a few times in my life where I just had to say to someone, I can't be a part of this relationship any longer or right now. And there aren't very many, as I said, but I do pray for a few people like that and say, God, if it's possible later on, could we re-enter that relationship and maybe see if it's healable, savable somehow? Or can there be peace at least and some sort of sense of closure about relationships that didn't really have that at the end? You might have a few of those. Um, Can you imagine yourself having an afterlife purpose? I don't think Sherilyn was all the way there yet. She said, "I think I'll do that later. Right now, I'm just going to do somersaults on the lawn." And she just really enjoyed the fact that nobody was pressuring her and telling her that that was stupid or she should stop it. Uh, but I think later she would have found a purpose. I hope to meet up with her after I die and check it out. What's the next part of your story? There's parts of my life where I think, well, I really wished I could have done that or that. Um, I wonder if there's a way in the afterlife where I can indulge a road not taken. I have a kind of a stubbornness that I think is baked into me about um, the goodness of all that is. If you go to the Bible, you look at page 1, God creates the world and then looks at what's been created and says it's good and it's very good. And I try to align myself with the idea that the world, well, there's this line in the Psalm that says, the earth is full of the goodness of the Lord, that there's goodness all around me. And that when something bad, evil, destructive, discouraging enters in, uh, I can pay attention to it, maybe do what I can to alleviate it, especially if it's harming someone else. But there sometimes comes a point when things just don't work. Well, can I still look around and say the earth is full of the goodness of the Lord? There's a place in the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John where there's one of those feeding miracles that Jesus is well known for. In that particular one, Jesus is with his disciples, and that word means student, and he's the rabbi, he's the teacher, and he's teaching them a lesson through the experience of having thousands of people show up for a teaching that he's going to do, which you'd think, wouldn't that be great? The numbers are high. His disciples look at it and say, oh my God, what are we going to do? They're going to be hungry and we'll have to feed them. We don't have enough to feed them. How will we feed them? Um, and they bring it up to Jesus as a problem that he ought to solve because he's the leader after all. And he says, will you feed them? Well, what do you want us to do? Uh, we hardly have anything to work with. And he says, well, what do you have? And Andrew looks around and says, well, there's a kid here with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that for so many? Well, Jesus says, get them to sit down. And then the author says, there was abundant grass in that place. Well, these weren't cattle or sheep. They weren't going to eat the grass. But there was abundant grass, at least where they could sit down. And there was an abundance of something, not just grass. There was an abundance of grace. Jesus uh, received the gift from this child. He didn't steal the kid's lunch. Somebody asked the kid for his lunch. The master has need of it, and he gave it. Jesus then prays over it and blesses it, and then says to his students, now distribute it to the people. He didn't say, get out of my way, I've got this, because he's a teacher. Teachers draw their students into the lesson and oftentimes help them learn by doing. His students distributed the food, it kept multiplying, and they just kept giving it out, and it didn't run out. And the thousands of people were fed. And then he said, make sure to collect up all that's left over. And there were baskets full at the end. Well, I really believe that that's the way the universe is built. There's enough for everyone and really more than enough if we can figure out how to get it where it needs to be. And I've been trying through my life to be that kind of guy, to help with that sort of thing. But I love that idea that there's an abundance of something. I can remember being appointed as the director of the Newman Center at Arizona State University many years ago now. And when I asked to see the finances, learned that it was in debt and all the bills were being paid late. And there was a stack of them. And I had to, the ministry was abundant. There was joy and lots of people at services and stuff, but the bills weren't being paid. And I was frustrated. But then I turned to that idea of, well, what do I have an abundance of? I might have an abundance of money, but I have an abundance of faithful, joyful college students. I've got townsfolk who support this place. They're not supporting it at the level that it needs to be supported, but there are people who support the place. It's got a great history. Anyway, it's that counting of blessings. I had to sit down and I did it not just with myself, but with some staff members and said, what do we have an abundance of? And what can we ask the Lord to bless and turn it from being a little to a lot? And we did that. And we watched over time. I was there 12 years. I watched over time as we did one thing after another. We not only paid off all those debts, we ran the ministry, we expanded the program, we did lots of wonderful things. I still look back on that time as some of the most joyful times in my life. But it started with scarcity. And it was kind of hard to turn that around too, because when people get used to uh, feeling that they can't have or it's impossible or whatever, it can be hard to turn that ship around. I think Cheryl Lynn found that too, but at some point she changed. That's the only reason that she showed up in my dream. Even though she was barely ready to move along, she was more ready than she might have known. And then all it took was her to be asked, who would be helpful at helping you move? Boom. She had a resource right at the ready. Oh, it'd have to be Estelle. Well, let's get Estelle involved. We did, and kind of the rest is history. Well, I'm going to leave it at that. I just want to be a person who is living in joyful hope. If I can't have superabundant joy, could I have moderate joy? Could I have a tiny bit of joy? And could I ask the Lord to bless whatever I've got and make it be enough? And oftentimes the Lord will make it be more than enough. I hope you find that happening in your life. That's it for now. This is this episode, the kind of the closure of the trilogy of Cheryl Lynn, now training for the Afterlife Olympics. You can find her story in book one in the Afterlife Interrupted series. Remember that I pray for you regularly. And when I do, I try to imagine a spot in you, a cell somewhere in your body, mind, or spirit that might be the place where there's the origins of something that steals your joy. And I ask, Lord, would you go to that place inside that person, that viewer, that listener, and would you begin working with them if you haven't already? I'm praying that somehow something positive and good can happen to the people that care about this podcast. That's the point of doing it. If you want to be in touch with me and you're curious about the afterlife work that we do and haven't read any of the books, please read at least one of them first, so that if you and I have a conversation, it will be a more fruitful one. If there's something that I can do for you, be in touch through the website. Um, it's nathan-castle.com, and there's a place on it where you can fill out a little form, a contact form. So for right now, that's it. This is this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. Grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Bye now.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.
Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted.
Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.